there is no man that hath power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit, neither hath he power in the day of death. And there's no discharge in that war. Neither shall wickedness deliver those that are given to it. All this have I seen, and applied my heart unto every work that is done under the sun. There is a time wherein one man ruleth over another to his own hurt. And so I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of the holy, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This is also vanity. Pray with me. Father, we do thank you for your goodness to us today. We thank you for the blessings that we have in Christ Jesus. And Father, we thank you for this wonderful book, a book full of curiosities, things that we have learned, that we can learn about the ways of men under the heavens, and how thou art sovereign over all of it. Father, that Christ might receive great blessing this morning in our midst, in Jesus' name, amen. All right, we talked about last week how that man is unable by any means to retain his spirit. In other words, you will die when it's time for you to die. As hard, I mean, the young die, and the old die, and the middle-aged die, and teenagers and young adults think they'll never die, right? But they do die. I mean, there was a young lady this last week that was involved in a car accident, and her life was taken. She was, 18? So the appointed, not only is the time appointed, but get this, the means is also appointed. The way that we die is also appointed by the Lord. And so we as God's people ought to give thanks for all the things, even the infirmities that we suffer, we ought to give thanks to God for it, because it comes by His hand. It has purpose in our life, even if we can't see the purpose, even if we, and we certainly don't enjoy pain and suffering, but pain and suffering and troubles are a part of life, isn't it? Just the way that it is. Unfortunately, we wish that everything was just gumdrops and roses and rainbows and all those kind of things, but that's not real life. And a lot of people go through life with fantasies, and they're very, very disappointed because life does not meet their fantasies. I'm not going to go there. Never mind. Anyways, we talked about this last week, and we were going to pick up with what Job said about this in Job chapter 3, verses 17 through 19. He had something to say about death. And he says this in Job chapter 3, verse 17. He says, "There the wicked cease from troubling." What happens when the wicked die? They're no longer troubling us, are they? There the wicked cease from troubling. And there the weary rest. There the prisoners rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. The small and the great are there, and the servant is free from his master. So those are things, when death comes, it just strips man of everything. And all are equal in death. We all die. And we're all equal in that sense. Psalm 146, 3 through 4 says, "Put not your trust in princes, kings, noblemen, policemen, county commissioners, whatever they be. Put not your trust in princes, nor in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help. His breath goeth forth, he returneth to his earth. In that very day his thoughts perish." He's dead. Every man dies. Psalm 89, 48. "What man is he that liveth and shall not see death?" There's a question. Shall he deliver his soul from the hand of the grave? Selah. Think about that. You know, there's nothing wrong with planning in your life. You can plan for a long life, but live as if today is your last. Because you never know when the Lord is going to take you. And you might be standing in perfectly good health at this moment, and then in the very next moment, simply drop dead. And the reason for that? The Lord, right? It's up to God, exactly. Then we got a phrase in here that seems, in verse 8, that seems a little, I don't get it. And that is where it says, and there is no discharge in that war. It's like, discharge in what war? And so had to go back and look at that a little bit. It's to be understood according to the Mosaic law. In Numbers 1:3, it says, from 20 years old and upward, all that are able to go forth to war in Israel, thou and Aaron shall number them by their armies. So that young men from the age of 20 and upwards were to go, they were soldiers, and they were to be employed in war. And so that that was like a draft, if you will. 20 years, you're in. Sign up right here. So you were part of the army of Israel. So all men from the age of 20 and up were to serve in the army of Israel. However, over in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 5 through 8, we find that there are a number of exemptions available to such a young man. For instance, one of them is if he just got married. Then he had an exemption for, I don't know if it was for 1 or 2 years before he would have to go sign up. So he got an exemption in there. And there's 2 or 3 other exemptions there in that text which would keep you from having to go into war. So, but when it comes to death, there is no exemptions. You don't get an exemption certificate to get out of death. So when it refers to that there's no discharge in that war, he's talking about that there's no exemptions to keep you from death. Every man, it is appointed unto man once to die. And after that, the judgment. And then it says, neither shall wickedness deliver those that are given to it. Or in other words, given over to wickedness. Even most of the wicked, let me read my notes here. But when death comes, there's no exemptions, no discharge in that war. No escape is possible. Even the most wicked of men will not escape. The wickedness has given him great riches, perhaps power, notoriety. Maybe he has the ability to bribe some people and extort from others. Death cannot be thwarted from its purpose because God appoints the time and the manner of every man's death. So even if he's a rich man, even if he's a powerful man, he's not going to get out of death. It doesn't matter where your status is in life, great, small, rich, poor, righteous, or wicked, death comes to us all. Isaiah 28:18, and your covenant with death shall be disannulled, and your agreement with hell shall not stand. When the overflowing scourge shall come to pass, ye then shall be trodden down by it. In other words, it doesn't make any difference what you do as an individual. Like I said, I keep thinking of that man who is doing everything he can to extend his life exponentially. He has millions of dollars and can spend millions every year to keep his health up. And I remember reading this. But you know what? He's going to die. No matter how long he thinks he can extend his life, he's still going to die. And it's going to be at the appointed time. So, all are going to die. And then in verse 9 he says, all this have I seen, and applied my heart unto every work that is done under the sun. There's a time when one man ruleth over his own hurt. So we see the preacher is a keen observer of, let's say, government, civil government, all things that are done under the sun. He's been observing, because this is what he's writing about, is about civil discord and about government and our subjection to it and the ruling of kings and all things civil. He says, all this I have seen. That is the importance of obeying the king, regardless of how fickle he is, or his inclinations as a tyrant, or whether he is benevolent. It doesn't make any difference for those that are ruling over us. We are still to be in obedience for those in government that God has put over us. He's wise enough to see that all things have their season. Everything runs its course. Wicked come, wicked go. The righteous come, the righteous go. There's a cyclonic action to everything that goes on. I mentioned last week how that we'll have a president come in and we'll all like him and say, oh, he's going to be a great president. Then the next president comes in, we're just biting our teeth wondering, this man's going to ruin the whole nation. And then we go through that cycle, and then another, maybe another president's elected that we like, but we didn't, life didn't end under that president we didn't like.
Well, the Bible takes us through that time and time again. One king was good, then the next three were bad.
Yep. In the land of Judah, that is absolutely true. Israel had, when they split, all the kings in Israel were bad kings. But under Judah, they had cycles too, where they had good kings, benevolent kings, and then they had the most wicked kings. And we're going to bring up one of them here in a minute. But so there was a cycle of things, but we are still to remain obedient under those laws, under the civil government that God gives us, He puts us in, that if we lived in, pick a country, Russia, communist country, Vietnam, communist country. If we lived there, we could still live there as believers, could we not? And we could be subject to the powers that exist there and submit ourselves to them, right? Except for where they interfere with thus saith the Lord. Now, where thus saith the Lord is, that counters anything that civil government has to say. And so we need to be discerning in their activities. We know that the early churches, that when the kings gave edicts that said, you can't meet, you can't assemble there, you can't do anything. And so they would often sneak off, maybe that's the wrong term to use, but they would have services deep in the woods, in secrecy, very quietly. They wouldn't go walking around with their Bibles under their arms. Giveaway. They wouldn't have a song service lest their singing be heard. And so they met in caves, in dens, in secret places in the woods so that they could worship together. And that was in disobedience to the king, but in obedience to God. And so, but under any other ordinance, they were obedient to. And they often appealed to the king because they served the king in every way, except for these certain areas that were given by the Lord. So here the preacher was a keen observer of all things civil, wise enough to see that all things have seasons and judgments, and that there is an appointed time when all men must die in relation to those things in business and in life. So everything he did, every work under the sun, was to was so that it might be of some good for man, even if under the rule of a tyrant. That there was to be some good that we could do towards fellow men and in following government. Thus he comments, he says, where there is a time wherein one man ruleth over another to his own hurt. We have biblical examples of that. The man that ruleth over men, and such a man ruling in an arbitrary, which means he's got no plan. He just does things here and there. We have never had a boss that was arbitrary in his decision making. He just didn't seem to be organized. It just kind of a little here, a little there, and kind of all over the place. I've heard preachers preach like that. They're kind of all over the place. No direction in their preaching, no goal that they're trying to get to. And so it makes it hard to follow, makes it hard to, in the case of someone that's a boss or someone ruling over us, to actually follow direction if it seems like his direction is rather arbitrary. Or if the man is tyrannical, do this or I'm going to get you sort of thing. Remember Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, who, when he became king, the people were willing to follow Rehoboam, and they asked of him, would you just do one thing for us, reduce our taxes, because your dad made it really, really hard on us with the taxes. And Rehoboam heard the old wise counselors. Well, he kind of didn't like what the old wise counselor said, which was reduce the taxes. And then he had his friends, his young counselors, and they says, nah, just double the taxes. So what did he do? He doubled the taxes, and as a result, he lost 10 of the tribes. They separated, and the only two that were left was Judah and Benjamin, and that's what he had to rule over. The other 10 tribes says, we've got nothing to do with you. We don't want to have anything to do with you because, he was being oppressive, wasn't he? And so they separated from him, and he lost 10 tribes out of the 12. What about Egypt's destruction? We got Pharaoh, king. And what did Moses do? He went to Pharaoh and said, God told me to tell you to let my people go. Pharaoh says, I will not do it. Absolutely under no circumstances. The man was obstinate. He hardened his heart against God. And what was the end result? It was the absolute destruction of the entire nation of Egypt. When you think of all of the plagues that went through there, and he lost his entire army, they were totally destroyed in the Red Sea because he became very obstinate. He ruled to his own hurt. The loss of every firstborn child, which is generally considered the heritage of the nation. That was a big hurt. That was a big hurt. Now, we naturally hate it when somebody's getting away with some crime or has violated some personal right of ours. We hate that, don't we? We despise that. We just don't. One of the things that's unique about this country is that we have God-given rights, as every man does. Every man has God-given rights. But the government has even installed those in a Bill of Rights, which says that, in the first 10, Congress shall make no law regarding assembly, worship, firearms, things like, we've got 10 amendments right there. It isn't until we get to the 11th before are the limitations of government. The cap comes off as, oh, we could do this and we could do that. But in the first 10, there's this guarantee, and we become very independent in relationship to our rights under the law. Now, under a kingship, if we will, things are totally different, because you don't have three parts of government that are supposed to hold each other accountable, which we don't have in this day either, but there's some shadow of it anyways. The king's word was the law. The king's word was the law. And so you had no, quote unquote, civil rights. The only rights that you had were the rights that the king gave to you. And you could either keep them if he chooses to let you keep them, or he could take them away. He could employ you in his service immediately. You have nothing to say about that. So we need to be careful in our own lives. We need to be careful in picking our fights. There are times when we ought to stand up and well, I don't want to put things wrong. You'll stand up, demand our rights. You know what our right is? It's to serve God. That's the greatest right that we have, is to serve God. And we have rules concerning the Lord's church that he gives us as to, if we're offended, forgive. If a brother or a sister wrongs you, better to be wronged than to go to the courts of the land and be judged civilly or criminally by the courts, the unrighteous. In fact, where is the judgment actually supposed to be? In the house of the Lord. The Lord's people ought to judge these issues. And it's better that you just lose and forgive. That is far better. And that's over in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 if we wanted to study that. In Isaiah 35:4 says, "Say to them that are fearful of heart, be strong, fear not, behold, your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense. He will come and save you," deliver you. One of the confidence that we can have when we feel our rights are violated or we're being taken advantage of. Now, there's ways that we deal with this in the house of the Lord. But when the wicked do that to us, we have recourse in this country against some of these things. But remember, no matter what, the Lord will make it right for us. He will always make it right for us. You'll never come out the loser if we belong to the Lord. Never come out the loser. All right, let's move on to verse 10. "And so I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of the holy, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This also is vanity, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. Therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Though a sinner do evil 100 times, and his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God, that which fear before him. But it shall not be well for the wicked, neither shall he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he feareth not before God." Here we have the patience of God's people while we wait out the providence of God's will under the sun. We need to be patient. His providence works in all civil affairs. And one of the most difficult things for the righteous to see is a man who is wicked prosper. He shouldn't get away with it, right? That's what we're thinking. He shouldn't get away with these things. Even worse is that it seems that to get away with it are never brought to any justice or accountability. Saw a little, they're called memes, right? Yeah, a mime is something that, a meme. Where a guy says, I'll start trusting my government when I start seeing them put certain people in jail. And, we hear all of these about the Epstein's files and the Clintons and all of these people that, and Biden's and all this. We hear about criminal activity, but no one ever goes to jail. No one seems to get arrested. No one seems to get indicted. The only ones that ever go to jail and get indicted are the ones that are way down the line, but the elites never seem to get into any kind of trouble. There's all sorts of noise about it, but nothing's ever done. And so do we get a little bit irritated about that? Just a little irritated? Sometimes we might even get a little angry. They seem to get away with it. What the preacher writes about in our text is so true even today that I have no doubt it's been true since the Lord established civil government upon the earth. I think it's kind of like always been. In Romans 5:3 says, not only so, but we glory in tribulation also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience. So folks, even while things are going the way that they're going, we don't see the justice that we think there ought to be patient, because it is for us to learn to be patient. What tribulation worketh what? Patience. And patience, hope. And you know what patience means, right? Not somebody in the hospital. Patience simply means to bear up under the trouble. So the trouble is upon us and may seem to be oppressive, but patience is to bear up underneath the troubles. Don't pray for patience, or you'll get trouble. So, Lord, I need more patience. Then you need more trouble. To me, there's enough trouble in this life without having to pray for more. Now, the Lord will give you as much trouble as you possibly need to give you the patience that He wants you to have, right? So, Lord, don't have to pray for patience. The Lord knows how much patience you need, and He'll give you the trouble that will develop that patience and that dependence upon Him that we ought to have. It appears that the preacher is somewhat troubled also by the extent of God's justice is delayed. Because we see here, he says, because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men are set fully, or man is fully set to do them in them to do evil. So there's this, apparently it almost seems like the preacher's a little frustrated that when a guy does bad, judge him, right? Instead, it seems like his life is prolonged in the evil that he does. He just keeps right on doing it. And we wish the man would just simply die.
The fact that the man's not judged so speedily.
Right?
Doesn't see it because he hasn't yet. So he continues to do.
And worse than that, he teaches others to do the same and to continue in them. And that's one of the things that he says here. He says, and so, in verse 10, and so, or in like manner, under the same circumstances, there appears to be some exception to the law of retribution of which he's been just speaking of. He says, I saw the wicked buried. Now these, and here if we go back, we see that we're talking about rulers, wicked men, and leaders or rulers over the people, tyrannical rulers. These tyrants, these despots, who live lavishly and wickedly, who die and are buried with all honors in respect to their office, yet he himself is without any honor. Who, and it says here in our text, who had come from the holy, from the place of the holy. Now, how is it that the wicked come from the place of the holy? You know, these are all questions that plague people who are trying to study things out and go, all right, what does that mean? It's a somewhat ambiguous statement, but I think it can be sorted on this sense that the place of the holy is Jerusalem. That's where kings generally reigned, was from Jerusalem. That was the seat of government, and that's where the temple was at. And we find in Isaiah 48:2 that it refers to the holy city. In Matthew 27:53, it refers to the holy city. In Matthew 24:15, again, refers to the holy city, that being Jerusalem. And so that is from the place of the holy, the place where the temple is, where the priests met, where they had the law, where that was the place where people were to go to worship the Lord. And so Jerusalem was a holy place, a holy city. Mount Zion is there in Jerusalem. So we have this connotation that this man, these kings who rule in such wickedness, ought to know better, because that was the place where, it was a religious place. Was it not given by God he told the kings that they were to write out their own copy of the law? Each king was to write out his own copy of the law, to keep it for him, for possession, so that he could rule over the people in righteousness. Not many did that. Not many cared. But the place of the holy was Jerusalem. And he is removed by death from that spot, the very name which ought to have cried shame on his cries. In other words, crimes. Jerusalem should have caused them ought to cause shame in their own hearts, because they were not obedient to the Lord. And the expression here it seems to picture a great procession of priests and Levites accompanying the corpse the corpse of the deceased tyrant to the place of burial, while the final clause here in the text says, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. Implies that no long lamentations was made over them. There was no great weeping because they had died. There was no monuments erected in their memory. It's like the procession went down, they buried him, they walked away and said, glad that's over with. Let's get a new king. Men who do right and die are often praised for the righteous works, and memorials are raised to them, but the wicked have no such praise of men and are soon forgotten. The vanity that such men are worthy of no more than the burial of an ass. Jeremiah 22:18 and 19 says, therefore thus saith the Lord concerning Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah. Was Josiah a good king? Josiah was a very good king. But his son, Jehoiakim, king of Judah, they shall not lament for him, saying, ah, my brother, or ah, sister. They shall not lament for him, saying, ah, Lord, or ah, his glory. He shall be buried with the burial of an ass, drawn and cast forth beyond the gates of Jerusalem. That no good, dirty scoundrel. Now we see also that delayed justice incites men to wickedness. Boy, do we see that today. Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Even in our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, Article 6, guarantees the right of a speedy trial. I'm not sure how to define that. But in God's providence, he does not always judge the wicked in what we might consider a timely manner. Right? We want justice to be swift. We want it to happen now. And I can think of some people that I wonder why they aren't dead yet. None of you have ever thought that, right? But in God's providence, he does not always judge the wicked in the timely manner in which we desire. We have our plans, but guess what? God's thoughts are not like our thoughts. His ways are not like our ways. They're high. His ways are high above us. And while we have this horizontal view of how we think things ought to go, that's not the way that God says they're going to go. One of the most wicked kings in history of Israel reigned 55 years. Who was that? You ever heard of a man called Asa? 55 years, a wicked king. Our verse starts out here with, in verse 11, because, which connects it with vanity. He says, this also is vanity because the sentence against an evil man was not, work was not executed speedily. It connects the two words as being empty. Here's not referring to vanity of life, but rather the moralistic inconsistencies which we might have in thinking God is unconcerned with the plight of the righteous under such a wicked ruler. In other words, maybe God is unconcerned with us. He just has us under this wicked ruler all the time. God, don't you care about us? Aren't you concerned with us? Aren't you concerned with the troubles that we're having and the persecutions that we're having? Aren't you concerned about us? Why aren't you executing this? Your will? It is his will if there's a man ruling. How come that the judgment hasn't come yet, Lord? How come you haven't protected us? And from our perspective, God seems to delay in punishing the guilty. Isn't it true we want things done in our time and in our way? In truth, we see only one little portion of the course of God's providence. We don't see it all. We are very much subjective because we're in the middle of it. It's happening to us. It's going on around us. We're the subjects of all of what's going on around us. We cannot have an objective view. Only God has an objective view because he's already purposed it and planned it. It's all set up. And all is going according to his plan and purpose, right? Does God make a mistake in any of that? How many of you think God made a mistake at any time? No? If he did, would he be God? No. If he'd ever made a mistake, ever erred, would you have any assurance of salvation? You couldn't possibly. Because if he made a mistake in one place, could he not have made a mistake in another place? So we have delays. And it seems like God delays in punishing the wicked. But in Isaiah 46:10, declaring the end from the beginning, and from the ancient times that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, I will do all my pleasure. Declaring the end from the beginning. When was the beginning? In the beginning, God, creation. Where's the end? When time ends. And we move into eternity. God's people need to learn patience in the realm of world and civil government. While wealthy men and government leaders are involved in great wickedness, and they seem to get away with it, I'm reminded of the scriptures, in the scriptures, of the suddenness of judgment, how quickly judgment can come. 1 Thessalonians 5:3. For when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction shall come upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Oh, things are going along great, man. The peace talks are going on. We're settling things up, and all these nations, we're all getting together and unifying together. Then cometh sudden destruction. Peace and safety. Proverbs 29:1. He that being often reproved hardeneth his neck shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. Isaiah 47:11. Therefore shall evil come upon thee. Thou shalt not know from whence it riseth, and mischief shall fall upon thee. Thou shalt not be able to put it off, and desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, which thou shalt not know. Therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Judgment's not coming. People are getting away with it. If they're getting away with it, why can't I do it? Hey, I'm getting away with it now. Why can't I do more? No accountability, no judgment. Well, men's heart is already set to do evil. We know that because men are corrupt by nature, right? And because his nature is corrupt, being restrained, the only thing that restrains any man from anything is his own conscience, right? But if people are not being judged, you may just go against your consciousness or your conscience, violate law, because nobody's being held accountable for it. If you're not being held accountable for it, if there's no teeth in the law, if everybody's breaking the law and nobody's held accountable for it, then why can't you break the law? There is that which, when acted upon, becomes criminal. But if our criminality is not met with swift justice, we are emboldened to continue in that criminality and even do worse than we ever might have imagined. In other words, we got away with this. We can get away with more and actually become more criminal in the things that we do there, and worse crimes. This is so evident in our society. New York and other, no cash bails. Costs nothing to get out of jail. Get out of jail free card. In California, you could steal up to $900 before it becomes prosecutable. So, hey, you get to 901, then they might prosecute you, but they'll probably reduce it. Liberal judges are setting free criminals who have committed violent crimes. Have you not? I've read and have heard on the news various times where criminals arrested 130 times, and they're still out on the street and they commit murder. No surprise. We wonder, how are they even on the street committing charged 130 different times for various criminal offenses, and they're free on the street? Many of them felonies, but they're let loose. No wonder there's large criminal enterprises in our country, because there's a lack of accountability. Hear the admonition of the Lord concerning these evil men. Romans 12:19 and 21. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourself, but rather give place unto wrath. Not yours, God's. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, Get this, because the vengeance is with the Lord. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he thirsts, give him drink. For in due sowing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. There is a waiting upon the Lord to take care of the injustices in our world. And sometimes that's hard for us to bear because we want to engage and to do something. Isn't that natural? Want to do something instead of just leaving it to the Lord and letting him deal with it according to his design and purpose. All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father, we thank you again for our time this morning in thy word. We thank you for the blessings of it.